Well, as you know, this is Christ the King Sunday. It is almost 100 years old as a celebration in the church, and it was instituted after the First World War when Western civilization had crumbled under the weight of immense and unimaginable violence, which we're probably still feeling the effects of over a century later. And it was during a time when human government was failing and we had the rising of totalitarian rulers, people saying, "I will be the one who will save you from your trouble. I represent the power of the state and myself." And so we ended up with this long run of individuals who were representing this totality of government sublimated into the individuals. So we had names like Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot. The list goes on and on. These people who said, "You do not need a God, you have us." And indeed, even when they died, their bodies, if they had a body after they died, or if their body was preserved, were put on display like the relics of saints. And in fact, you can still visit some of those bodies. They were seen like new pharaohs, divine beings on the earth. And so the church created this holiday to say that this vision of a totalitarianism is a lie. The idea that you can close off human existence from God and have all human needs met by some political individual, institution, or party is not sufficient to explain the fullness of our existence. And so this was the church's protest to say, there is a king, but his name is Christ. Now, many years have passed, and many of those forms of government have failed. Some of them were very short-lived, a few years, 12 years. Some of them were 70 years. And we are entering a new era of authoritarian capitalism, a new era where this is seen as the real alternative to a kind of government that is ineffective, represented by people. So this authoritarian capitalism, which could also be seen as a kind of competitive capitalism where some of the mechanisms of democracy have been reduced to control by certain parties, but they're not really forms of democracy. It's just seeing who you can get to compete on your behalf. The church will have to find a new way to express the transcendent value of the human being and not just be reduced to the opportunity of generating profit, particularly for someone else. We say that Christ is the King, and what do we mean by that? Some pastors don't like this Sunday. At least they don't like that it's called Christ the King Sunday, because they say, well, kings are the problem. We don't want monarchs, and the Greek word monarch means ruled by one. Now, the critique is not misplaced. The Bible itself is very suspicious of human kings. The Bible is very suspicious of people who take on the totality of power because it inevitably corrupts them. So you'll remember when the people say to God, "We want a king." And God goes, "Well, you already have a king. You have me." And they go, "No, no, no, not you. We want a king like all the other nations." And he goes, "No, you don't. It's not a good idea. Once you're on the inside, you won't like it." "Well, how do you know we won't like it?" "I'm God." "What do you mean, how do you? I know you won't like it. I'm God." And they go, "Well, we still want a king." And he goes, "Look, here's what's going to happen. They will take your money. They will take your horses. They will take your children. They will take your wives. They will take everything that you have because they're the king. You do not want a king. You have me, and I will rule you with justice, peace, gentleness, mercy. There will be a wonderful prosperity. All you need to do is live up to the covenant that we made, remember?" And they go, "So you're saying that we can have a king?" And then they get a king, and it's a disaster. And in fact, if you look at the long list of kings, both in Judah and in Israel, you could probably count the faithful kings on one hand, and the rest end up being theological disasters. Now, they may have had successful economic policy or international policy, or they may have had interesting building ideas and designs, but very few of them lived with the possibility that their rule needed to be under the leadership and guidance of God. And so when we say that Jesus is the King, already we are embracing the critique that the Bible offers of a selfish, egoistic power that subjugates and subjects everyone for the sake of ruling over. Which is no mistake that the gospel text today doesn't have Jesus on a throne, doesn't even have Jesus at the end of time, doesn't have Jesus apocalyptically coming back and saying, I'm here. We have Jesus on the cross. And so the cross remains a sign of contradiction to a world that has totalitarian tendencies. It is God's answer to human violence. It is God's answer to human prejudice. It is God's answer to the reduction of human dignity to something that can be disposed of easily, as Jesus is disposed of, so that he's not too inconvenient on a major religious festival. One of the first moments we have in the gospel that was read this morning is Jesus saying, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. This is how he rules. He rules with forgiveness. He himself has been injured. He himself has been violated. And the prayer that he offers is not, all right, sending coordinates now for the airstrike. Father, forgive them. The forgiveness of this ruler opens up the pathway to the future that God intended, not a mutually assured destruction, but a mutually assured development of the creation to its proper end. And when he says they do not know what they are doing, part of what he means by that word of knowledge that he uses, means that you see something real in the world, you perceive it, but then when you abstract an idea about it, you're wrong. I mean, this is a very powerful statement that Jesus is making. You're observing the world, but once you abstract an idea about what you think it means, you're wrong. And so Jesus says, Father, forgive them because they've seen your world, but they've gotten the wrong idea about it. And think of how much human suffering, how much human sadness, how much human brokenness is the result of perception that turns into a wrong idea about a relationship, an individual, about what it is we're supposed to be doing here anyhow. And Jesus asked for forgiveness, which is a kind of healing, not just of the outside, but of the inside, so that we can perceive and know what God sees and knows. Now, one of the fundamental stories that we could return back to is the story of Cain and Abel, brothers. This is the relationship Jesus wants to have with the world, siblings, brothers, sisters, whatever it is. You belong to him. He's your brother, whatever you are. And we see Cain and Abel living together as family, and then Cain sees his brother, gets the wrong idea, and murders him, thinking he's done the right thing. And then once he's called on it, he says, well, I don't know, what am I supposed to do? Be his babysitter? You want me to know where he is right now? Even though he knows. And then there's a washing of the hands and an eliminating of the responsibility. Well, it wasn't ever my problem. And this is exactly what we see on the cross. Jesus has been murdered by his brothers and sisters, us, the human family. This is our answer to God's love, is this violence and murder. And then we try and wash our hands of it and say, well, we had to do it. It's not that we wanted to, we had to do it. And it's no mistake that a crowd gathers. Whenever human beings have been executed or killed with violence, then always a crowd gathers. It's a form of entertainment, if nothing else. We know this from the history of American lynching. When African Americans were lynched in this country, it became a picnic and a party. People would send postcards. And if you've never seen that, Google it and prepare to be horrified by the postcards that were sent in the party atmosphere of American lynching. It's the same dynamic of violence, the same dynamic of turning on a brother or a sister and saying that their death was somehow necessary for the sake of the larger community. And apart from the crowd that gathers, we have the religious leaders, we have the soldiers, and notice the only thing they take care of are his clothes. They go, we don't want to stain his clothes now. Don't tear his clothes. Those are valuable. Human beings have gotten the wrong perception. The flesh of the human being on the cross is what's valuable, not their clothes. And yet in every instance of violence, and we saw this during the Holocaust, people would say, oh, don't shoot them through their clothes. I can use that jacket. Make them take their clothes off, and then we'll shoot them, so that we can keep their clothes pristine. was like a kind of shopping trip. Whole villages in Belarus and Ukraine would go in the houses of dead Jews and shop for their clothes after they had been killed. It is the perversion of what's important in the world. And this is what it means that we say Christ is the King, is he is a sign of contradiction to this violence. He is a sign of contradiction to this misapplying of value. And this is why he comes to rule, and this is why his prayer is to forgive, and this is why he is the King, but he is the King who hangs from the cross. You will notice when the two criminals are described that one of them sees his role as accusing God. And this is a very human thing to do. How often have we been the accusers of God for the very things that we are responsible for the very trouble that we have created, for the very violence we have inflicted on others? We have said, God, why have you allowed this? Even though it is by our hands that the work has been done. And the other criminal won't have any part of it. He says, don't say that. Aren't you afraid of God? He goes, we deserved it. We did this. We ended up here. This is the fruit of our own activity. He sees. Finally, someone sees. He perceives and he knows. And he finally sees Jesus for who he is, the person that will lead us out of this cycle of revenge and violence and lying and dissembling and joy in the suffering of others, as long as we can make sure that it stays far away from us. Jesus finally has a person that sees the pathway out of human enthrallment with death toward a new beginning, which is Easter. And that's why he says, remember me. Jesus, see me and remember me, know me properly. This is where we finally have someone. Here we might say God was even answering the prayer of his Son from the cross. Father, forgive them, they do not know what they're doing. And finally, just a few minutes later, we have someone who knows exactly what he's doing. I see you, I perceive you, I know you, you are the way for me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And remember me not for just what I've done. Remember me for who you make me into. And this is one of the important parts when we talk about being hopeful people related to human anthropology. Part of being hopeful is we're not just loving people for who they are, we're loving them for who God is making them in Christ. It doesn't mean that we're affirming the things in them that are not good. We're not affirming the things in them that are destructive. What we are saying is this ruler from the cross, this one who offers forgiveness, this one who allows us to see people as they actually are and will be in his kingdom, can have us love. Not just for who they were, but for who they are, and finally who they will be in his kingdom. And Jesus makes a promise, today you will be with me in paradise. Because when he says on the cross, it is finished, it is finished. It's over. God's work of redemption, God's work of reconciliation, God's work of contradicting our totalitarian tendencies, the work is over. And we no longer have to be complicit in the lie. We can say, no, the truth about the world is love that was crucified. The truth about the world is a tomb that was empty. And that is the government that we are under. Amen.